I was in college, graduated with a wonderful C average, made the rest of you guys look really good in the upper part of the class. It was time to go serve my country. I was excited about that. But I wanted to do something that might lead into a career. As a young guy, I was looking at the airlines, right? I'll learn how to fly and then go become an airline pilot. And that's how I started looking. I was going to serve one way or the other. So I took my degree and I went to the Navy recruiter. I saw the posters with planes, and that's how I picked it. And then I was fortunate and blessed to be able to get into naval aviation.
Early days, after Boy Scouts and all, I entered the Civil Air Patrol and was pretty sure I was going to be an Air Force pilot. I said, that's what I really want to do. So I finished up with that when I was like 18 years old and had been involved in a lot of their programs to include their cadet exchange program. And then I went off to college after high school and went to Florida State University. And after about 2 years, I said, I've got to go do something else. So I checked with the Air Force recruiter and he said, well, we do have some quotas in aviation, but we don't have any pilot quotas right now. He said, but we can make you a bombardier navigator. And I told him, no, you can't. That's not what I want to do. And then a Navy recruiter just happened to be there at the Student Center, and I went over to talk to him, and he says, oh, yes, we've got the Naval Aviation Cadet Program, the NAVCAD program. He said, take this test, you pass it, we'll get you a physical, and he says, I can have you in Pensacola before the summer's out. And sure enough, within 2-3 months, it was all done. And I was there as a chrome domer, as a poopy in Naval Aviation Systems Command. And eventually the Navy sent me back to school, and I finished up my degree out at Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School.
My name is John Paganelli. I am a retired naval officer. I spent a little over 32 years on active duty as a naval aviator. Early on in my 20s, I had never had any intention of joining the military, but I was in college during the Korean War, and a small college up in Pennsylvania, Grove City College, and I had a triple major. I majored in beer, girls, and fraternity, and I concentrated on those, and my draft board somehow got a copy of the transcript of my grades. And one day in the mail, I received a letter from my draft board that started out, greetings, report to a particular address in downtown Pittsburgh for your induction physical into the Army. And knowing that walking around in the snow in North Korea, carrying a rifle and a heavy pack, none of those items were in my top 10 to do, so I borrowed a fraternity brother's car and I drove to Akron, Ohio, where there was a naval air station. And a friend of mine had joined the Navy about 4 or 5 months before, because he was sort of in the same boat. And I joined the Navy at Akron, Ohio. And while I was there, talking to the flight surgeon that happened to be the doctor on duty when I got my physical, he said the Navy was in desperate need of pilots, and although my grades were not very good, I did have enough credits to apply for Navy flight training. And at that point in my life, I had never sat in an airplane of any kind, and I told him that I really always wanted to be a pilot. So I took the written, they gave me the physical, and the next thing I knew, I was on a train headed for Pensacola, Florida.
I decided to go see a recruiter, and I walked into the Air Force recruiter first. I had a degree from Georgia Southern in accounting, and he kind of almost laughed me out of his office. He's like, "Yeah, you're not Air Force material." Like, "Oh, all right." I went across the hall, and there was a Navy recruiter, and so I walked in. And I think this is probably a common experience for a lot of people, because I've heard this story several times from other folks. I walked in, the guy said, "Hey, come on in, how's it going? What do you want to do? Fly F-14s? No problem. Just fill out this paperwork, sign here, do this, do that, and we'll get you going." So I did, took their test, called me back. And next thing I knew, I was pretty much face down in the dirt in Pensacola. I started AOCS class 1379 in June of '79. Got my commission in October and went to flight school.
When I interviewed with these reservists in Olathe, Kansas, Reserve Marine Corps F-4 pilots, they had me around the table. "What do you want to fly?" I said, "I want to fly the thing with the most motors, the biggest, ugliest thing you got, because I want to be an airline pilot." And they just shook their heads, and they said, "Oh, man, well, okay, we need pilots now, so we'll let you in." And then when I first stepped foot into Pensacola at Aviation Officer Candidate School, AOCS, saw the blue Phantoms flying overhead at 200 feet. That changed my mind instantly, and I became focused on trying to get into tactical aviation and jets.
Once I got my wings, before postgraduate school, I'd selected for helicopters, and I transitioned to the SH-3 and got stationed with HS-6 at Ream Field in San Diego, California. We made our first deployment in 1964. I got there in early '64 after going through the RAG. And while we were deployed, and I was in the town club at, I think it was Sasebo was the town club, Sasebo, Japan, when we got the emergency sortie called "Return to the ship immediately." The ship is leaving the harbor. And this was a carrier. This was the USS Kearsarge. So we got there, and sure enough, we sortied out, not with everybody, of course. Some had to be transported out later through different means. But after about 12 hours at sea, the captain came on the 1MC and told us, "Hey, the Maddox and the Turner Joy have just been attacked by patrol boats out of North Vietnam." So that was the start.
I went through pre-flight here at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, and after completing the course there, I was sent out to Whiting Field. A lot of briefings followed and whatever. I was assigned an instructor, and my instructor briefed me very thoroughly for my first flight, and at that time the training aircraft were North American SNJs, tail draggers, tandem seating, and on my first flight, he put me in the front seat. He crawled into the back, and all I did was sit there while he went through all of his starting and checking and taxiing out. And he called the tower for takeoff. And when we manned the runway, he got lined up, and I was just sitting there in the front seat. He added the power. The airplane started rolling down the runway. The tail came up, and the next thing I knew, the ground was falling away from me. And I looked around, and I thought, this is cool.
They asked me what it, everybody, us young kids, we said, what do you want to fly? And I looked at the plane I thought was the most beautiful plane I'd ever seen. That was the A5 Vigilante. That was a sleek dart. I've never seen anything like that. I still think it's really cool. And that's what I wanted to fly. I got my wings and jets in the jet pipeline, and there were too many pilots being winged, and I went back to Softly Field and I flew T-34s as a flight instructor. So we called them plowbacks, plowback to the training command, and we called ourselves the Filthy 50. There were 50 of us in that class that got their wings that went back to the training command. Probably one of the best things I've ever had happen to me and ever done. It was training Navy pilots, and magnificent, wonderful, rewarding. And from there, I did pretty well, and they said, well, what do you want to fly? What do you want to do next? I said, I want to fly in the fleet. They said, well, we'll get you an A7 squadron. I said, that would be great. And that's how I got into A7s. The Harley of the fleet, I call the A7.
Our cruise for 64 was pretty uneventful. My time was spent learning how to become a helicopter aircraft commander. So 2 years later, we went back in 1966 when things really heated up. And we were charged with not only providing 15 aircraft for search and rescue, or for ASW, but we also had a detachment of 6 aircraft for combat search and rescue. And these were outfitted differently. They were armor plated. The airspeed on them, because of all the armor plating, the max you could get was like 125 knots, and the aircraft was rated for 144 knots. So that gives you some idea of just how heavy we were. We had the engine nacelles and all covered with 1/4-inch steel plating. We had some on that covered up the side of the transmission to protect it. And then for the pilots, somebody dreamed up the great idea of what was called a Sir Galahad vest. This was 1/4-inch steel with a couple of loops on it that once you got in your seat, because you could not get in your seat, the pilot seat, with this on, the crewman would bring this up and set this on you, and it covered your whole chest and your particulars, But we found that we could not fly with something like this. Plus, if we had to ditch at sea, there's no way we could get out of the aircraft. So we just chose not to do it. We ended up putting M60s in the aircraft. That was what we could acquire. So we had one that went in the door, and then we had one that went in the side window on the port side, so port and starboard. And the crewmen were taught how to utilize those. It was kind of a come-as-you-are war for us, because there was not a lot of pass-down. We talked to one of the squadrons, one of the H3 squadrons that had come back recently, and they kind of gave us an idea of what was going on. But things just were accelerating at the time and really heating up. So by the time we got into the Gulf of Tonkin, it was pretty well ironed out as to what we would do either with our ASW aircraft and around the ship and providing support to the fleet, or we would send off a detachment of pilots and air crewmen to go with the SAR detachments, and those were normally aboard one of the attack carriers. We were still on the Kearsarge CVS-33, but we went out and we went aboard ships like the Constellation and the Intrepid is what I remember. I spent my SARDET time on the Intrepid, and the SARDETs usually lasted about, for a crew, usually last, I want to say, 5 weeks, something like that.
It was a cool airplane to me. I mean, and it was the A7 Echo, you know, with a HUD, which quite a few years ago, that was the thing, right? The new thing. You have a HUD and an inertial navigation system, help you find your way around. And what was really kind of interesting about it for me, my experience in the RAG, the Replacement Air Group, BA-122, was they were all single seaters. So your first flight was in a single seat airplane. There was no two-seat trainer, you know, back in those days. So I thought that was pretty cool too. But you flew as, you know, you had a wingman, or you were a wing. I can't remember which one, but you went out with an instructor and flew around. It was really cool.
I was very fortunate to successfully get through flight training with a down or so every once in a while. And we flew the SNJ all the way through the basic flight training. And I was then sent to Corpus Christi, Texas. And the first aircraft that I flew down there was the instrument course in a Beechcraft, a little side-by-side twin-engined airplane that fortunately, after going through instrument training, I never had the opportunity to fly one of those airplanes again. But from there I went to advanced training, and the first aircraft that I flew there was the old World War II fighter, the Hellcat. And I ended up getting me about 66 hours in the Hellcat, and then transitioned to the AD Skyraider.
You know, I've got some notoriety for what I've done flying wise. I failed at my first attempt at the ship, landing on the ship. I had 10 day landings and 6 at night, which was a requirement. But they said, that's not good enough. Not good enough. And I thought I was done. I thought, you know, they're going to can me. Gave me another instructor, Don Simmons, and he took me under his wing, and literally and figuratively, and we got it done. And from there, I got really focused on how to do it, and then went to the fleet, right into the fleet. The war had wound down. Yeah, it was just about over. I wanted to fly. You know, I got my wings. The Vietnam War was still on, and of course, as a Navy guy, everybody that flies tactical air in the Navy wants to be involved because that's what we train for. That's the essence of what you were doing there, right? To defend your country and to have wingmen and take care of your wingmen and your leads and those sort of things. So that's what I wanted to do. Never got to see that, but going in to VA 25 in 1974 was wonderful.
Well, one day, we're back at the ship flying ASW aircraft, and we heard the emergency beeper go off, which meant that we had a pilot who was in trouble coming out of North Vietnam, or he had made a run into North Vietnam with one of the Alpha strikes. So he was down, and only later did we realize it was an Air Force pilot, so it wasn't even a Navy pilot. But his aircraft had gotten shot down the evening prior, and he was the only one of the 2 pilots to get out of the aircraft. So he was escaping, evading, trying to get a rescue. Our normal SAR detachment was not available. The aircraft that are up there stationed for just this purpose, they could not respond to the emergency request because they were too far away. They were too far south supporting another effort. And timeline-wise, there was no way that they could get back. So I talked to the pilot that was with me, Bill Roy. We were both aircraft commanders at the time, and we kind of switched, flip-flop each day on who signed for the aircraft and took the crew out. So I told Bill, I said, Bill, I think we ought to let them know we're here, that we could be available. He agreed, and so we called up the controller, the controlling ship up there, which was North SAR at the time, and told him we were available. And he said, okay, I want you to take a vector to this position, which took us about 5 miles off the beach of North Vietnam. And he said, I want you to just orbit there till we can see what we can put together as far as a rescue attempt. So they ended up getting some ResCap, which were 80 Sky Raiders from one of the supporting ships. And they provided the support for us to be able to go in country. So this was south of what? It was near Vann, anywhere was the location. The ResCap finally came overhead and they said, okay, you guys ready to go? And we said, yeah. And so we climbed up in altitude to about 2,500 feet and started inland. And they gave us directions to get us to the location. Once we got in there, they found a group of North Vietnamese regulars chasing our victim, our pickup. So the ResCap had us kind of just orbit a little bit as they came around and tried to put them at bay. And the nice thing about a A1 Sky Raider, it carries an ammunition load of like a B-17 in World War II. So they had rockets, guns, bombs, all of it. And they basically put on a firepower demonstration for us while we're trying to come in to pick up this guy. And we got direction, picked up his beeper, and we circled around and came into a high hover to pick him up. He was down in a canopy of trees, so there are 2 pilots and 2 air crewmen in there. And so the air crewmen were manning the guns going in, but once you got in, they were busy trying to set up the rescue and be able to extract this guy out. So we used a rescue penetrator seat, which has basically it goes down like a cylinder, and then it has 3 arms that come out where somebody can come up and just grab around it and sit down on one of those 3 straps and be able to be extracted. And that's what we dropped through the trees. And as we brought him up, we brought up a big tree limb with him. But we got him safely inside while the SPADs were working hard to keep the North Vietnamese at bay. They were pretty determined that they were gonna get this guy, Air Force captain by the name of Tiff Hawks. And once we got him aboard, then the ResCap aircraft kind of vectored us because they saw that, you know, the AAA was starting to set up, and they vectored us to a different altitude and caused us to change altitudes and direction to try to avoid that. Well, once we got him extracted, we took him right back to the ship, and they took him down to sick bay to make sure he was all right. Then we went down to debrief with combat and in the CIC center, and they debriefed us and showed us where all the AAA was going off behind us, lower and behind us, in different cases, because we're changing altitude, changing direction during the whole extraction. So thank goodness for the ADs. And one guy in particular, Jack Fieldhouse, was one of the pilots. I remember his name well, and he provided that protective cover to get us back to the ship.